Namaste, friends. I'd like to take this opportunity to announce that I've been enlightened by the Buddha, as a very fat man who believes in karma has taught me that I require no worldly possessions in order to attain bliss. In other words, Clive Palmer's suing me for defamation. He seems to have taken personal offence to my gentle ribbings of him over the years, and as such, I now know how one of those deadbeat dads on Maury Povich feel when he announces that they are not the father. Very happy. I was involuntarily doing this while reading his letter. But you see, in Clive's attempt to pervert the law, he made one tiny miscalculation, and that is, I'm a millennial. Going bankrupt doesn't scare me. I don't have a house. Thanks to your 4-decade-long support of the coalition, you took anything of value away from me before I was even born, Clive. I have as many assets as you have seats in Parliament. None. I'm not going to capitulate to you, you fat toad. Which is not a defamatory term. You're an introduced pest to Queensland of plague-like proportions, and it would be my absolute privilege putting as much public attention on that fact as possible. In short... See you in court, Tub. I've got another copy of the letter. That was just for dramatic effect. Now, this is the letter that Clive Palmer's lawyer Sam Iskander sent me. Naturally, I was terrified when I received an intention to sue from a law firm whose website looks like a carbon copy of Dodo Internet that has a lighthouse as its logo. Why? Because Seinfeld did it? Aesthetics aside though, professional through and through, as this legal document has a mere 9 typos in it. It's not that spelling's everything, after all it's the content that counts, and when it comes to the law, no one knows it better than Sam Iskander, who has unapologetically announced that I have damaged Mr. Palmer's personal, business and political standing beyond repair by calling him, quote, a fatty McFuckhead. Mr. Iskander, just admit it. Sending this letter was the low point of your career. That wouldn't be an easy call either, as you've done some scummy deeds for Clive's lucre in the past, haven't you? Such as withholding money from his workers unless they agree not to criticise him. Is that just a template on your laptop at this moment, mate? You said the same thing to me in your second letter. You made it unnecessarily difficult for those workers to attain that money, even if they agree to Clive's insane demand. And you've employed a myriad of legal tricks to delay Clive Palmer from facing a court. But at least that's all in the realm of legalities. This is just the lyrics to a Simple Plan song. This is 4 pages of unbelievably whiny sap, where you assert that it's defamatory to call Clive Palmer a fatty McFuckhead, and then go on to claim that Clive Palmer doesn't have to prove that any of these allegations are false, they just are because Clive Palmer says they are. How very Clive Palmer of him. Frankly, I think it was a tactical error on your behalf to leave it entirely up to me to prove that your client's a fatty McFuckhead, as I'd do that for fun anyway. But to make it a legal obligation to serve this great nation's courts, Mr. Iskander, you've moved it up from being a privilege to an honour. Your client admits.
I am fat. That's what I said.
You're still making fun of me because I'm a fat person?
No, well,
Listen to him breathe.
to take money from Queensland Nickel and...
He snores while he's awake. That's the first part of the accusation thrown out the window. He's a big boy. And Mick? Mr. Palmer claims in The Advocate to have Irish heritage, so McTick, and fuckhead, Clive. If your overall goal was to escape extreme embarrassment and humiliation, then making it a legal obligation for me to prove that you're a fuckhead in court, thus moving it away from my own personal opinion into the realm of a provable, very publicised truism, has got to be the worst possible way you could go about achieving that goal. But okay, if I must. Fuckhead. According to the Oxford Dictionary, a fuckhead is someone who's either stupid or contemptible. Stupid or contemptible. I have an entire document filled with very prominent members of society as well as former employees of yours that got me questioning, where is the love? Your local MP went as far as to say,
if Clive Palmer came today and he was on fire, I don't think anyone would cross the street to spit on him to put it out.
you do realise that for a defamation allegation to be successful, it has to be proven that I have lowered your standing in the eyes of the public, right? Somehow I don't think that people who fantasize about you dying slowly and painfully would now think less of you because you've been called a fuckhead. There is footage of you at a soccer match where the entire crowd is chanting over and over, "Fuck off Palmer." You spent $60 million on an election bid. That's more than double the two major parties combined. And the entire nation's response to you was, "Fuck off Palmer." So if you're not the dictionary definition of a fuckhead, who is? Normally at this point in the video, you would have inspired me to make some juvenile jab at your intelligence that no mature adult would waste a single thought on, such as calling you a dense Humpty Dumpty, but you're suing me for that too. Clearly the irony is lost on you that you claim you're suffering, quote, extreme embarrassment from being called a Humpty Dumpty, while also protesting that depicting you as a baby is a, quote, false statement. One or the other, Blimpy Bill. I know you haven't figured this out yet, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. Being offended by a nursery rhyme sort of wipes any credibility away from the claim that you're not a baby, especially when you feel the need to point out that calling you a Humpty Dumpty is a false statement. That suggests you think people wouldn't come to that conclusion automatically, and as such, this is a serious question and I cannot believe it is. Do you think Humpty Dumpty's real, Clive? You claiming that Humpty Dumpty's defamatory, i.e. a reasonable person would hear that and think, it's Clive Palmer, a giant egg that sits on a wall all day, is he? News to me! Suggests so. Even if not, the very fact you want it disproven in court proves the first part of the insult correct. Dense. Only reinforced further by your failure to register the poetic license in me calling you a nutty turd that pretends to be Australian when you have used copious amounts of that exact same technique for the exact same reason. You authorised 2-minute-long ads that were on every network in the country, non-stop, round the clock. Did you somehow miss them, Clive? The ones where you were suggesting the West Australian parliamentarian Pierre Yang is acting as an agent for the Chinese because he speaks Mandarin? It's always about food with you, isn't it, Clive? Well, listen to this next point very carefully, and don't worry, you'll love it. It's about chocolate. A picnic bar reminds me of a turd. As such, you're the first person that pops into my mind when I think about a picnic bar. If you don't like that association, I suggest you treat your former employees a little better, who's sorry to snitch, but they called you a straight-out turd.
But he just doesn't care about people. Basically, he's basically just a turd, I suppose.
That's got a little more oomph to it, because after personally dealing with you, he has assessed that you're a piece of poo. I took that, rebranded it as you just looking like a chocolate that looks like a piece of poo, and you're suing me? Come on! I spun gold from straw here. You should be offering me a job as your PR manager. Pretends to be Australian? That's a comparison to Picnic's parent company Cadbury, as you both use over-the-top Australiana as a marketing technique, except in their case it actually works. Oh, looks like you tried to copy Caramello Koala and ended up with a Dunkin' Donut. Nutty? Well, we can roll that into the next accusation as it's just a synonym for crackpot. Don't know where I could have got the idea that the man who claimed that Rupert Murdoch's ex-wife is a Chinese spy. In fact, that there's hundreds of thousands of Chinese spies in Australia that no one else has noticed, not even ASIO. Just you. The guy who thinks dinosaurs are cool, but definitely isn't a baby.
Rupert Murdoch's wife, Wendy Dung, is a Chinese spy. Well, his wife, Wendy Dung, was a spy.
In what universe could I have possibly conjured the idea that the man who thinks the Greens are secretly funded by the CIA and is suing me for claiming that he's considered a walking meme after he spent vast sums of money making a video game called Clive Palmer Humble Meme Merchant, where he is literally a walking meme? What court would conclude that a man who commissioned hundreds of memes of himself and then turns around and sues someone for declaring that congratulations, Clive, at least part of your marketing strategy worked, is not a crackpot? The only thing that's more insane than you, Clive, is the fact you have enough money to make a Supreme Court seriously consider that. Now onto his more weighty claims, and honestly, there's not much difference. Those were post-Jenny Craig Clive and the following are pre-Jenny. Further, it was said that... You know when his nickel refinery started going under in 2015, he siphoned $180 million out of the business so he could tell administrators...
No, look... I can't pay the workers $70 million over them, alright? So it's your problem now.
Clive, where are you calling us from?
Why does that matter?
You know who ended up paying those nickel workers? You. You were hit with a $70 million tax bill to pay for the people that this real-life Dodge mining magnate shyster from Little Elvis Jones ripped off. Mr. Palmer ceased acting as director of Queensland Nickel in February of 2015. He also claimed he stepped down as director in 2013. He also took directorship back up in 2015 for a brief period of time, 26 days, which apparently everyone on the board was A-OK with. Sounds legit. In my experience, people entrusted with the welfare of a major industrial corporation are just dandy with the position of director being treated like it's the hokey pokey dance. That's how a scrupulous enterprise works, right? The same way the Russian presidency does, where he then transferred $700,000 to his political party. Gee, Must have mistaken caretaker mode with taking care of business. Did I mention the person he appointed as director after he, wink, stepped down, was his inflatable clown that's been filled with walrus fat and has the least punchable face on earth nephew, Clive Mensing, who's now, nothing sus about this, a fugitive in, even less sus, Eastern Europe. Sounds like the actions of a man with nothing to hide. Hiding in a country that has no extradition treaty with Australia. Paid $4,000 a week by Clive to stay there. Oops, sorry, that's defamatory. Paid $4,000 a week because, quote,
Because it's my money, he's my nephew, and if I want to pay him $1 million a week, I will.
I had to check up on that quote a couple of times. It sounded to me like it could be the tagline to The Godfather Part 4, who claimed he stopped paying his nephew as soon as he discovered he was a fugitive. It was then discovered that he didn't stop paying his nephew after he discovered he was a fugitive. Jeez, Clive. I think you attempted to reboot the wrong party. You would have fit right at home in Family First. This is all during a period of time where someone called Terry Smith had the authority to make financial decisions totaling tens of millions of dollars, despite the mildly debilitating factor that he doesn't exist. When asked about it, Clive denied having ever used the name Terry Smith as an alias.
Well, I don't use an alias of Terry Smith. That was somebody's email that I would have used that day to approve something.
And then a few days later, bragged about using the alias Terry Smith.
So I've got an email in Terry Smith that I normally use to communicate with my family members.
As such, calling you dense isn't defamatory, it's flattery. I was imagining that your brain was the size of a walnut. Evidently, it's subatomic, as it's capable of being in two places at once. And while we're on the subject, you claiming that your election ploy, that's defamatory again, as according to you, it wasn't an election ploy. You deciding to pay back your workers had nothing to do with the election, even though you decided to start paying them back a month before the election, after refusing to pay them for years. And only if they promise not to say anything mean about you ever again. Can't twerk your way out of this one, mate.
That's the man that should be running the country!
That means you're either silencing them because you're a baby, or you didn't want negative election coverage, or both. Yet you're suing me for claiming that you owe those workers money, when even you have now accepted that you owe those workers money. You're a nutty turd. The statement that was made intimates that Mr. Palmer had control of the decision, which he did not, and that he is in some way personally liable for the debts which, at law, he is not. I intimated no such thing. I'm perfectly aware that he at law isn't liable for the debts. What I'm intimating is that your client's a cunt. It was also claimed that $500 million of his assets that were frozen for suspected criminal conduct. The Queensland Supreme Court, operating in its civil jurisdiction, made a freezing order against Mr. Palmer and its several corporate entities in May of 2018. The statement that was made intimates that Mr. Palmer has engaged in criminal conduct and that $500 million of his assets were thereby frozen. This is false and defamatory of Mr. Palmer. And he's absolutely right. That is false. But defamatory? That would suggest that what I said is a worse reflection on the character of your client than the truth. It's not. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to correct the record. You see, having read a bunch of articles about Clive Palmer, I foolishly confused the court case where he had $500 million worth of assets frozen with the court case he's concurrently fighting over his handling of his defunct Coolum resort, which is a criminal case. I thought not paying his staff $70 million, allegedly, seems a little more criminal than a failed timeshare bid, so got me there. I am legally illiterate, and I unequivocally apologise for the statement. I do, however, take comfort in the knowledge of knowing that I'm probably feeling nowhere near as sorry as you currently are for forcing me to correct the record, which makes you look even worse, you potential convict. In reference to the United Australia political party, of which Mr. Palmer is leader, it was said that Mr. Palmer's entire campaign, all his billboards of him looking like the love child of Donald Trump and Big Kev, are courtesy of the People's Communist Party. Which it is. And all he needed to trade for his Jenny Craig model face plastered all over the country was a nice big chunk of this nation's sovereignty that he handed over faster than he did his workers to administrators. Which he did. To have his Jenny Craig model face plastered all over the country. You're right. This is my second official apology to you, Clive. You can't be a Jenny Craig plus-size model. That would defeat the purpose of Jenny Craig. You also stated that Mr. Palmer is one of, no pun intended, the biggest reasons for Chinese influence in our country is... Oh, that was a pretty easy Where's Wally, wasn't it? And True Blue Clive was the Trojan elephant that let them in. I wonder why he was offended by walking meme, but he isn't offended by Trojan elephant. It wasn't included on his list of insults, but Humpty Dumpty was. Is he admitting he's an elephant? And that Mr. Palmer is Chairman Jinping's bund boy. Now countersue, I did not say that. I said that Clive Palmer is Chairman Xi Jinping's butt boy, which is far more offensive. You intimate I'm saying he's friends with him. I'm making a comment which is obviously vulgar abuse. I'm jokingly saying he's a hooker. Also, while we're admitting culpability, my editor mistook Xi Jinping, president of CITIC, with Jinping, president of China. I didn't bother correcting him, thinking, oh well, the joke still works and no one will notice. And how gloriously fall on my ass into a pool of gold correct I was. Because not even Clive's lawyer, who's worked on cases for Clive against CITIC, noticed. He appears to have as deep a knowledge of CITIC as my editor, who spends most of his time playing Smash Bros. The statements that were made intimates that Mr. Palmer has placed his personal and business interests ahead of those of Australia, which he has not. You're right. How could I have possibly come to such a besmirching conclusion that he puts his business interests ahead of Australia when he ran for Parliament with the explicit intention of killing off the carbon and mining taxes, so that instead of the people of Australia, you got the money generated from our resources? Yet you seem to think that's not putting your personal and business interests ahead of Australia's. Okay. Wasn't aware that your personal will morphs into reality. Probably should have though, from the Liberals getting a third term thanks to you. But just so no one makes the same mistake in the future, apparently, according to the McClivey dictionary, the definition of patriotism is to personally enrich oneself by impoverishing the rest of the nation. What evil and slanderous spirit possessed I to accuse Clive, Frederick Palmer, of putting his own interests ahead of the nation's, when he not only denied this country hundreds of billions of dollars from resources that are its birthright, but then on top of that, demanded billions more from us to build infrastructure for him. To move our coal to Australia's most treasured and emblematic natural wonder, loaded onto 10,000 ships and then dragged over its fragile, brittle carcass, where it will then be burned into the atmosphere to advance the economies of countries we're not aligned with, just to make doubly sure he kills off our oldest, largest living resident so that he becomes our oldest, largest living resident. And on top of all of that, demands tax cuts for embarking upon this selfless and noble voyage. What part of that equation would suggest to any rational being that Clive Frederick Palmer puts his personal and business interests ahead of the rest of the countries when the very name of that mine is China First? Before we continue, yes, there's more. If you're feeling infuriated by Clive's antics, this makes the pill easier to swallow. Just imagine everything he says as being the exact opposite. Example.
And I've never moved any assets offshore.
What he actually means by that is, he has, including an attempt to move his flagship corporation Mineralogy to New Zealand in order to take advantage of a trade agreement loophole so that he could sue the Australian public for $45 billion. That is 1.5 Gonskis worth of money. That's the level of narcissism that possesses this blob. Not only does he think he's more important than this country, he thinks he's more important than generations of this country. And do you want to know why he thinks we owed him the combined GDP of 3 African nations? Had nothing to do with us. Does that soften the blow? A tiff. An ego-driven tiff he had with the Chinese government that he led into this country to develop our resources, despite the fact he thinks they're such a threat to our national security. He spent millions of dollars on ads sounding the alarm bell about an airstrip in the middle of nowhere, which he thinks will be used as a tool of invasion, which if he's to believe his own demented fantasies, then question for you, Snorlax, how would you label your behaviour? Inviting this alleged enemy into the country, allowing them to develop our resources to use against us. I'll just add another handicap to this population of 25 million versus 1.3 billion, just to even it out. Denying us the money from our resources so we're both too monetarily and resource poor to defend ourselves. In fact, debilitating us even further than that, suing us for more than an entire year's worth of this nation's military defense budget, purely so you can flog this nation's wealth off to the enemy even faster. You've asserted that I intimated that you, quote, had an unethical relationship or engaged in improper dealings with the Chinese government. Well, according to your own scattered and perverse worldview, I let you off lightly. If you follow your own demented logic to its own natural conclusion, you've committed treason, on a level only comparable in this nation's history to Robert Menzies selling iron off to the Japanese, which would explain your baffling affinity with the United Australia Party. In short, don't waste your time on me, Clive. It would be much better for you if you just quietly admitted that calling someone of your mental capacity a crackpot is not defamatory. Make peace with it so it doesn't have to be dragged through court that you're the living embodiment of the New Age philosophy that money is a magnifier, as you're not just a fuckhead, you're a fuckhead to the power of 1 billion. This letter pathetically drags on for another page and a half on how this squealing pig was wrong, so we'll just cut to the biggest joke of all. In Clive's estimation, this egregious cocktail of childish name-calling, telling the truth, and in one case, embellishing the truth in his favour, is worth to him $500,000. Mr. Iskander, to quote the dense Humpty Dumpty himself, tell your client to stick it up his arse. If not for the aforementioned reasons, for the sheer hypocrisy of this letter even existing, as your client stated.
Well, I think people need to have a religious freedom in this country, and we need to have freedom of speech. While you may not agree with people, you've got to fight to their right to defend their view. Once we start making decisions on what's right and wrong, what people can say, we'll become a very repressive society, and the battle of ideas, the best ideas will always win.
Good on you.
Remember what I said about interpreting everything Clive Palmer said as being the exact opposite? As soon as it came time for him to stand up for free speech, he snuffed it. During the period most crucial to protect it, during an election. An election he spent $60 million attempting to influence. Furthermore, in his second letter, he attempted to stop me from mentioning him ever again. Clive, you're a baby. The adult version of telling on someone is suing them, so allow me to bring this down to your level. You started it. You can give it, but you can't take it, eh? Well, in light of this information, this is my third official apology for the video. I apologise for depicting you as a cartoon image of Homer Simpson. Just one of the many typos. And I apologise for that, as your character traits are closer to Eric Cartman's.
I'm telling you guys, suing people kicks ass.
Clogging the court system and wasting millions of taxpayer dollars on your self-described hobby, which amounts to nothing more than ruining people's lives for fun. What a patriot. Using nothing but empty puffery to mask the pathetic truth that you have an ego as fragile as the Fabergé eggs you so strikingly resemble. I know this because you've already played your cards, might I just say. What a poor hand. All the money in the world and you trade it all for what people think about you. Well, that's unfortunate. The generational gap that you more than most are responsible for has had an unintended consequence that for once benefits a millennial. You might understand meme culture superficially, but to quote Bane, I was born in it, raised in it. This MacBook's my mum. I've been completely desensitized to the emotional needs of others, and as such, I'm your worst nightmare. I'm a robot with nothing to lose. You're not very familiar with our generation, but this is a photo of us waiting for an iPhone to come out. And the only reason we want the new iPhone is so we can see memes with even more pixels in them. And Clive, I reckon this came out just in time. This is the best meme you've ever come up with, and I want as many people as possible to see it. I want a legal fund set aside, because if this goes unchallenged, it'll set a dangerous precedent in this country, and I know everybody's sick of the free speech argument from how much American YouTubers bring it up, but at least they have free speech. Our system's based off the idea that only lords have free speech, which I'll admit, if there was a referendum to change that, I'd be strongly in the no campaign because that is too hilarious to change. Unless of course the exception was to expand the definition to include edgelords. But in this country, the idea of free speech is moulded by precedents. That's where the real battle is. Not some hypothetical tyrannical government imposing sedition laws on the citizens that people like Clive Palmer like to paint it as, but banks and billionaires like Clive Palmer himself throwing money at media megaphones to propagate their own anti-population ideas and using the law to silence those that dare speak up against him. This is just one of many examples of Clive Palmer using his money to silence dissent, and it ends today. You're not going to get away with this, Clive. I know what gets under your skin now. Virtually anything, as you're extremely thin-skinned. As such, we're selling shirts on my new website that say on them, Clive Palmer is a fatty McFuckhead, and don't worry, you can't get sued. I've checked this out with a lawyer because we've put in extremely small text in the bottom left-hand corner, in my opinion. And just to make doubly sure it's not defamatory, I've enlisted the help of some of the most prominent members of our generation to show you, Clive, that even before my video was released, we all thought you were a fatty McFuckhead. Deal with it. To highlight just how much of a service they're really doing for their country, ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the national anthem. Clive Palmer Clive Palmer is a fatty McFuckhead.
I'm Lewis Spears, and in my opinion, Clive Palmer is a fatty McFuckhead.
Hey Clive, you're a fatty McFuckhead.
Hi, I'm Clive Palmer, and I'm a fatty McFuckhead.
Clive Palmer is a fatty McFuckhead.
Clive Palmer is a fatty McFuckhead.
Clive Palmer is a fatty McFucking fathead.
Yeah, Clive Palmer, you fatty big fuckhead! Fuck you! Ha ha ha! Suck your dick!
Clive Palmer is a fatty big fuckhead. I think he likes meat pies.
Clive Palmer is a fatty big fuckhead! Yeah!
Clive Palmer. he's not good.
Hi, I'm Harris Bomber Guy, and Clive Palmer is a fatty McFuckhead.
Who's Clive Palmer?
Please share and comment below. Comment.
Clivey boy. Even before editing that first video, I thought you, mate, were a fatty McFuckhead.
He definitely has like a McDonald's breakfast every morning